Good evening. It's October 25th, 2013. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I will be moderating tonight's webcast. You're viewing our weekly Friday event, which features Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. And we will follow the format that we have been following with a series of questions that will be presented by myself and Dennis Mason, who's joining me tonight, to which Mr. LaRouche will have an opportunity to respond. So, we begin with a question from a source in Washington, D.C., and it's a short question. It reads as follows. Mr. LaRouche, can the United States mold a new constructive strategy in the Middle and Near East by forging a more inclusive relationship with Iran, Russia, China, and India, and other states in the region? If so, will that be the end of the Sykes-Picot Agreement? What approach do you envision to achieve such a strategic arrangement?
There is about one way, and only one way, that this could be pulled off. First of all, it can be done, but what has to be done, it has to start from the United States. And the United States has to put Glass-Steagall into place first. Doing that first creates the basis in the United States Glass-Steagall system for relating now other nations to the same thing as the Glass-Steagall system. In other words, without starting with a Glass-Steagall system, or the equivalent of a Glass-Steagall system, you could not possibly accomplish this. However, if the United States, which is the homeland of Glass-Steagall, starts the process, then the other nations will have very little difficulty in adapting themselves to almost an identical policy. And that's what will work. This is what has to work, because we have to realize that as we are now on the edge of thermonuclear war, we've been hovering on that for some time right now. Therefore, we need a system which deals with that problem. And since the United States has a Glass-Steagall record inside, and as a matter of fact, our Constitution actually is the basis for Glass-Steagall in the first place. So our constitutional system sets up the pattern that the other nations wish to agree, and right now most of these nations have no choice but to do that, because they need a change from a monetarist system to a Glass-Steagall system. That's what the difference is. And therefore, since we have the kind of system that does that already, by the other nations coming in on the same system, they automatically have the benefit of having that kind of classical program as opposed to what they would do otherwise. This actually would work, and probably it's the only thing that would work. And I think if we take a list of a number of nations you can identify, these nations together will actually define the basis for an almost immediate clicking in of a Glass-Steagall type of program.
This next question is from Professor Yelena Borisova, who is the head of the anti-globalist movement in Russia, or as they call themselves, Anti-Globalistskaya Dvizhenie Russi. First, just by way of background, this question pertains to the widespread debate following President Obama's speech on September 17th, which was 3 days after the Lavrov-Kerry agreement was reached in Geneva concerning Syria. In this speech, Obama announced that he had been forced by General Dempsey, the U.S. Congress, the American people, to put his previously announced plan to launch a bombing campaign against Syria on hold. But Obama ended that speech, quite inappropriately, mind you, by invoking American exceptionalism. The following day, an editorial was published by Vladimir Putin, which appeared in the New York Times. And that editorial ended with Putin making a scathing criticism of Obama's usage of this term. What Putin said was, I would rather disagree with a case that Obama made on American exceptionalism, stating that the United States' policy is what makes America different. It's what makes us exceptional. Putin continued, it is extremely dangerous to encourage people to see themselves as exceptional, whatever the motivation. There are big countries and small countries, rich and poor, those with long democratic traditions and those still finding their way to democracy. Their policies differ too. We are all different. But when we ask for the Lord's blessings, we must not forget that God created us equal. So that said by way of background, here is Professor Borisova's question. What she says is, there's a great deal of discussion in Russia right now about Obama's assertion of U.S. exceptionalism. People are saying this is practically comparable with the Nazis' notion of exceptionalism, exclusive nature of the German race. She says, I think that there's some linguistic confusion here. For us, the exclusive nature of a country or a people violates the idea that all men are brothers. So the connotations are extremely negative. But perhaps in English, this word does not have such connotations, but rather refers simply to an outstanding place in history? Nobody would argue with that. Maybe we linguists, she's a professor in philology, need to clear things up and mitigate this aggravation. We would put something on this subject on our site and circulate it widely. Thank you.
Well, the origin of the concept of American exceptionalism has a historical background, and people who do not know U.S. history are therefore at a loss to make an intelligent approach to what this subject is. The point is, we had a situation where Europe was going repeatedly into oligarchical disorders, and it was a terrible condition. In this process, toward the end of his life, one of the greatest men who ever lived set up this concept. And that concept of his was the basis which would then informed Christopher Columbus as to how to deal with this problem. And so we had in the United States, which included the Massachusetts Bay Colony as an example of this, we had an exceptional condition. Exceptional to what? Exceptional to taking exception against what the European systems were, the oligarchical systems. It's the exception against the oligarchical system that's crucial. And Obama, of course, fits in with the oligarchical system perfectly. He's a tool of the European oligarchy. He is an exceptional, well, in a different sense, the sense of you don't want what you don't want. But that's the point. So the point is, this is a historic point, that mankind has suffered from oligarchical rule in all kinds of circumstances. In the United States, or what became the United States, what happened in two brief phases, once the initial phase of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and then later in the American Revolution, we came up with this exception, the basis for authority is human, and human as opposed to oligarchical. Unfortunately, in this process, Obama has a completely oligarchical mentality. And what he needs is an exception to himself.
Well, I have a question on the nature of currency to maybe clear something up there as well. In the recent period, several books have come out in Europe calling for a return to national currencies. In particular, there's a book by Francois Heisbourg, who is chair of the International Institute for Strategic Studies. And in there he calls for France and Germany to make secret preparations, take a long weekend, and just do it. Now, while we have called for a return to sovereign currencies, with your wife Helga in particular consistently calling for Germany's return to the Deutschmark, this is not that. What we propose it as part of a comprehensive program for economic development. This would be a disaster. A mere issuance of currency with a different packaging will not solve the problem in Europe any more than Glass-Steagall by itself with no economic program would solve the problem here. How you manage the money on its own is absolutely meaningless without a program for economic development. And I think this is an important concept which bears repeating, not necessarily for those who are calling for a return to the currencies, because they're not looking for a solution, but for those who are actually looking for a solution, a lasting solution to the crisis. Can you elaborate on this?
Well, the idea of currency is really a complication here, because the American system is not based on a monetary system. It's not a money system. We use something we designate as money, but the money is subordinated to a higher principle, a credit system. The point is, you do not have a currency which you use as a standard for measuring different kinds of products. What you have to do is you have to realize there's as defined by Alexander Hamilton in some detail in defining the constitutional principle of the United States. And that is, we do not operate ourselves on a monetary system. That is, we do not set up money as having its own independent value. We rather look at the thing from the price standpoint, as Alexander Hamilton did. You're looking at the price, the comparison of the process of flow in terms of increments of value as the process of production and circulation proceeds. In other words, you can come back with a farmer, a typical kind of thing in an early period. Most people were farmers. Then they would grow different kinds of crops, raise and manage them. And they would find that there were increments of value that were sort of natural increments with each one of these changes. And so our system, our American system, this is what the Glass-Steagall system tends to do. It does not always do that, depends on how it's managed and what government is managing it. But the Glass-Steagall system is actually not a monetarist system. It's a credit system. In other words, the credit is what you give for the value of what you've produced. If each person in the succession adds value in terms of use value in that process, that is value. So that's a credit system. And the credit system is based on also the comparative value of the way people produce. If they're more productive, then they are more valuable. But so the whole point here, the reason I emphasized this before, is that when you look at it from pardon me, a sneeze was coming on. So in that process of a credit system, you eliminate the monetarist speculative value. For example, today, what do we have? We have a filthy system under Obama, and we had something pretty bad like that before. Kennedy was moving in the right direction, John F. Kennedy. But he got shot because the British monetarists and the Dutch monetarists killed him. Or that is, they are the ones who wanted him killed. And they wanted his brother killed for the same reason. And the cover-up by certain people in this country, the same people that went into the war in Indochina, they were traitors to the United States, in fact. They were also the condoners, if not the actual murderers, of President Kennedy. So these are the kinds of criteria that people have to learn if they want to become civilized in a way that mankind has to become civilized now among nations, to get rid of the money system or monetary system and understand what is meant by Alexander Hamilton, for example, as a credit system. And our U.S. system of money is based on a credit system, not a monetary system. Therefore, we represent a standard which is a realistic standard from the standpoint of productivity. So we do not believe that you should take money and speculate on the value of money, which is what is happening on Wall Street. That's the hyperinflation that's killing us. the speculation on the value of money. Gambling, in other words, just plain gambling. And this was produced in the United States during the recent period, where gambling at Indian reservations and elsewhere was spread as a way of spreading gambling per se. And Wall Street today is nothing but worthless value, which is gambling. We could wipe out every bit of Wall Street, and the human beings would not miss anything. Nobody would be deprived of anything worth having. The best thing to do would be to just close down on Wall Street, because I can tell you, and I'm certain of this, that there is no real value in Wall Street today. We could wipe them all out, cancel all their assets, and nothing would be lost of any value.
Okay. I have two questions that have come in from Dr. Mark Shelley. As you know, Dr. Shelley, who is a practicing physician based out of Pennsylvania, he held a press conference yesterday where he announced his new movement, Doctors Against Murderous Obamacare, and delivered his manifesto, the text of which can be found on the LaRouche PAC website. He calls on his fellow physicians and medical doctors to join him in calling for three initiatives. Number one, to restore the essence of the Hippocratic Oath as the philosophical center of the medical profession, rather than subordinating healthcare to the Wall Street population reduction agenda. Number two, to restore the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 to liberate the United States economy, including the medical system, from the crushing effects of the biggest hyperinflationary debt bubble in history. And three, to impeach Barack Obama, saying multiple legal authorities have already assembled articles for impeachment. This man has failed you and will allow you to die with his inept and undeniably lethal policies that masquerade as healthcare reform. It is time for the American people and their medical community to wake up before it is too late. So Dr. Shelley's questions are as follows. 1. How can we reawaken the necessary compassion and spirituality of the American medical profession? I'm asking this question because I was quite provoked by my recent reading of Dr. Leo Alexander's classic essay on medical science under dictatorship, which appeared in the July issue of the New England Journal of Medicine in 1949. Dr. Alexander spoke with clairvoyance regarding the current state of American medicine. I found it chilling to recognize that the process of Hegelian utilitarianism that Dr. Alexander described as having taken over German medicine in the late 1930s is the process that is consuming American lives and medicine today. I've called upon American medical professionals to recommit themselves to their inherent compassion by rediscovering and re-embracing the principles of the Hippocratic Oath. What do you suggest be done to bring about this necessary spiritual reawakening? And then secondly, he asks, what is the time frame for a thoroughgoing change in our healthcare delivery system after the reenactment of Glass-Steagall? What will the change be like? How long would it take?
Okay. Well, in some cases it confuses me, but the question, because I agree with it generally. The question is, what could I add to what he has said, as in these remarks? And the point is, we have to, first of all, cancel the idea of a monetarist system. That's the first thing you have to do. And you also will have to do something what's called an exemplary action. An exemplary action is to bankrupt Wall Street. Because what you have to do is you have to get rid of a system which uses usury, which is what it really is. And you have the usury of money. Then it becomes the usury of health care. Where the purpose of the health care is, in a sense, is not health, but it's begging for money. It's swindling. It's gambling. So the physician is put in a position of, in fact, gambling rather than medical delivery. The medical delivery, service delivery, is an associated feature, if there's anything in it. But But what the whole system has to be changed fundamentally. Therefore, my only confusion is, well, if we get Glass-Steagall in and bankrupt Wall Street, as it should be bankrupted, because it has no intrinsic value, how can we float in our system a system of gambling? And that's what medicine is becoming. It's becoming a gambling. You don't deliver much to the patient. You don't even have to look at the patient. You just gamble, in effect, gambling. So this is what we have to go really back to what? To Nicholas of Cusa's understanding of the necessity of getting out of Europe in those times in order to free mankind by going across the great waters of oceans to find a new land which is not full of European oligarchical principles. But the point is the fact that we put something out there, call it money or call it the equivalent of value, and make that the issue of medical service, in this case. That is that rotten. Therefore, you need a nice purgative job. You say that you have these assets in Wall Street. Yeah, fine. How do you define these assets in Wall Street? So you're not really concerned about doing some actual service. You're concerned about swindling. You're playing a game of gambling. And that's all it is. So we have to destroy the gambling system, because the gambling system is polluting our currency. It's polluting our economy. We want a system like that which Alexander Hamilton specified. Everybody pays a decent price, something that corresponds to value, and is paid for a decent job done in a decent way. And that's the only way to get. We've got to go to the root of the evil. Don't try to reform evil. Eliminate it. That's the solution.
Okay, a question on taking exception with Barack Obama. Tomorrow in Washington, D.C., there's going to be a mass march against NSA surveillance. Both Representatives John Conyers and Justin Amash are going to be there. And remember, they were the two congressmen who sponsored the bipartisan bill against the NSA's domestic surveillance program. And Edward Snowden himself has written a personal message, a very rare event, direct communication to the American people, in which he states, in the last 4 months, we've learned a lot about our government. We've learned that the U.S. intelligence community secretly built a system of pervasive surveillance. Today, no telephone in America makes a call without leaving a record with the NSA. Today, no internet transaction enters or leaves America without passing through the NSA's hands. Our representatives in Congress tell us this is not surveillance. They are wrong. And then he calls on the American people to participate in this march, which is going to be occurring tomorrow in Washington, D.C. Also, a video promoting the march, which was posted on the website, makes clear a parallel, in this case, to Nixon, featuring Daniel Ellsberg, whose leaking of the Pentagon Papers began the process which eventually led to the ousting of Richard Nixon. It also includes footage of Robert Kennedy calling for a defense of America's constitutional rights, and a little glimpse of J. Edgar Hoover as well. This march comes on the heels of the latest international summit to be derailed, in which the previously scheduled agenda, in this case a free trade agreement between the United States and the EU, has been forced to be scrapped because of leaks that appeared in the press the day before. And instead, the subject of the summit has now become desperate attempts at damage control by the Obama administration. And this is now being called the Handy Summit, Handy being the German word for cell phone. Because the story came out the night before the summit that documents from Edward Snowden showed that the NSA has been monitoring Chancellor Angela Merkel's communications through constant surveillance of her cellular telephone, along with 35 other world leaders. So this is really just the latest in a pattern of such summits that have been disrupted in precisely this way, going all the way back to Obama's meeting with Xi Jinping, which was derailed because of revelations the night before that the United States was hacking into China's computer systems, and also including the president of Brazil's scathing speech at the United Nations, accompanied by her cancellation of her official state visit to Washington, D.C. And the whole time, Obama has been forced ever increasingly onto the defensive, and any authority that he may have had to bully or intimidate on the world stage has been undermined and severely eroded. And of course, this whole process has run in parallel with President Putin's successful outflanking of Obama's drive to ignite world war in Syria, and President Xi Jinping's consolidation of global leadership towards a new paradigm of development and attempts at strategic and economic stability. So my question for you is, what insights could you give our viewers as to how to understand these developments in the Snowden case on a grand scale in terms of geostrategy and what you referred to last night as the systemic orchestration of the downfall of Obama?
Yes, I'm very happy with that thesis. No, there is no possibility that this system can be tolerated. That's the essential thing. It's not a question of what are you going to do within the system to please the system to the degree that the system is happy, and you may be happy or not. So the whole thing is a fraud. You go back to the basics. The entire system they're dealing with has two characteristics. One is that I just referred to. The thing is a complete fraud is the monetarist system, and which should be eliminated. And it's exactly what our Constitution provided, the elimination of that kind of system. The other factor is that behind all this, there's a motive. It's not that people have just chosen to do something. This had a motive. The motive is called the oligarchical principle. Now, people will recognize the oligarchical principle in some aspects of its application and expression, but they don't really understand it. The Queen of England has made a very clear statement repeatedly of what that means. What that means is, as she has said, the necessary function is to reduce the human population, which is now approaching 7 billion people, reduce back to 1. And that's only on the way. Now, this is not unusual, really. It's unusual in certain aspects in terms of this time in history and so forth. But in principle, it's not. This is the oligarchical system is a system which treats itself as made up of not human beings, but animals. And there's some animals who are the on-top animals and some people who are on the bottom animals and some in the middle. So therefore, the idea is to prevent man having the power of mind, the power of the human mind, to create value. Not just value as money, but value in every sense of life. To improve, for example, the human species is distinct from all other animals by the principle of what? The principle of increase of the energy flux density expressed by the animal. Or not the animal, but the human animal. So therefore, this is the principle here is that as you look at the chemistry textbooks, take any good chemistry textbook, and what does it tell you? You go map yourself through that process to higher and higher orders of energy flux density. That's the characteristic of the success of the human species. No animal has that ability. Only mankind is known to have that ability. The ability to rise in the tables of chemistry to higher and higher orders of chemistry. In other words, energy flux density. And the chemistry has something to do with the way it works. So that's our intention. That must be our intention. Now, what she's doing, the Queen, and people like her, like the Roman Emperor Nero, for example, what they're doing is they're saying we are super animals. We are essentially animals. I am, she says, a queen animal, an imperial queen animal. And therefore I have certain interests along with the other members of my tribe or my species or whatever it is. And she says, we've got too many people. Why? The problem is if we allow people to earn their living by productive activity, then they will be independent of us, the oligarchy. And we must therefore limit the number of people we allow to exist and prevent them from developing skills which will make them more valuable, more productive. So yes, she's a cheat and a liar and a thief, all those good things. But what's the motive? The motive goes back to the siege of Troy and the genocide against Troy as an example. The purpose was here was a form of society in Troy, the city of Troy, which had a productive function. And there were similar things like that around that area at that time. And so this productive function was what they were out to destroy. And they did destroy. What did they do? They got into the city, which was defended. And the enemy had a problem of getting in there. So they used the wooden horse. They put the wooden horse in through the gates of the city, and you had a cadre of bastards who were out waiting there at night, who then came out of the horse, snuck around, opened doors to get more of their own people in, and then went with a massive slaughter of the population of the city of Troy. And what was surviving as survivors of that massacre were wiped out except for a few. And the city was torn down, ruined, broken. So that is the example of what the oligarchical system is. That is what the Queen is in her policy, as she states it, of reducing the population of the planet from 7 billion people to 1. And the concomitant of that is destroying technological progress, eliminating technological progress. What's being done in terms of the green policy is a deliberate policy of mass murder against the population. Green is mass murder. If you're for the greenies, you're a mass murderer. Because that's what the intention is. There is no improvement. There's no increase in value in a green system. The green system is the enemy of mankind. And we have to launch a cure for this process by developing higher energy flux densities. The United States and other nations must now go. It may take some time to get there. It may take years to get there. But we must establish a kind of energy flux density system based on thermonuclear fusion. That will probably take us, a number of years, a decade or so, to get there. But we've got to go in that direction. We've got to get out of this trap of the green poison, which is a mass murder policy. And that's what our mission is. That's what the secret is. We must eliminate, once and for all, the oligarchical system, as was demonstrated in the case of Troy and Rome. What was Nero doing? What was his productive role in society? They're all the same. The Venetian system, the Dutch system of today, And it's the Dutch system which created the British system. Because it was the Dutch who invaded Britain and called themselves Britons. So this kind of swindle is what the problem is. That's the root of the problem. The only way that mankind can survive under the conditions of history now is to eliminate the oligarchical system and to eliminate all government systems which correspond to the Queen's principle.
Okay. On the subject of the oligarchical system, I have a question about the Saudis. Early this week, Saudi Arabia indicated that they will be turning down a seat which was offered them at the UN Security Council. Now, I'm not sure why they were even offered a seat at the UN Security Council. Maybe they're looking for a new type of renewable energy where they hook up a rotor and a stator to Roosevelt's grave. The amount he's spinning right now would probably generate enough electricity to power some nations. But with Prince Bandar, he said that the refusal of that seat at the UN Security Council was a message not to the United Nations, but to the Obama administration for failing to launch a military strike on Syria. This was reported by Reuters and several Wall Street Journal articles. Now, this past Tuesday, we were on the ground at the keynote luncheon at the 30th Annual Conference of the National Council of U.S.-Arab Relations in D.C., where Prince Turki bin Faisal spoke to the same effect, assailing the United States for failing to attack Syria, though instead of going after Barack Obama, he directed his rage toward the patriotic war avoidance faction within the United States, which helped to prevent the attack, singling out Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, saying that Dempsey had given, quote, comfort and solace to criminals by preventing the attack. Now, bin Sultan is the head of Saudi intelligence and national security and is a known element in running the original 9/11 attack at New York. His wife, Princess Haifa, is known to have provided funding directly to some of the hijackers. Princess Haifa, in turn, is the sister of the Prince Turki bin Faisal, who went after General Dempsey on Tuesday. Now, all of this has been packaged as a rift between Saudi Arabia and the United States. But given the state of the financial collapse globally, and given the pedigree of these princes vis-a-vis 9/11 and the cover-up, and given the role of the British in consolidating the House of Saud in power in the beginning of the last century, the role of the Sykes-Picot Agreement in the region, the British-Saudi arms for oil deal which helped facilitate 9/11, I think it's a fallacy to look at this push from the Saudi princes as merely expressing displeasure at Obama's failure to strike Syria, or to look at it as which would generate a thermonuclear war with Russia if we were to have done that, or to look at this as a rift in relations. The House of Saud, they're a hereditary monarchy, a band of thugs really running a country, but they're an expression, or maybe an excretion, if you will, of the oligarchical principle. And the oligarchy is facing certain death. If there's a chain reaction of the financial system, with the collapse of finances and governments around the world, that'll take them down along with the rest of us. On the other hand, if we avoid that collapse by economic collaboration amongst sovereign nations, the oligarchy is done either way. So could you give an assessment on this?
We're dealing with a process here, and the processes of this type have apparent complexities because people are playing games. The Saudis, for example, complaining against the United States. Hey, come on. Do you think that's real? This is part of the show, the shadow game. And there's a way it's played. These guys are evil. You just understand, they're evil. History, this is what Nicholas of Cusa was addressing in his advice to his associates, as long as he lived. And then Christopher Columbus got the message from that way and did the right thing. That is to go across the oceans, get away from Europe, which is a place of pollution with oligarchism, And that worked to some degree, except the Dutch came in that century, that is in the 17th century, and they came in with their operation. It destroyed France pretty much, destroyed the French system pretty much, and did other evil things like that. So that there's this give and take and play that goes on among the oligarchy, but you have to understand what oligarchical rules are as the oligarchy themselves accept the idea of such a rule. Therefore, don't think that this is, that everyone is simple-minded and has a simple-minded intention. These guys get very complicated. They're more likely to invent several new sexes than they are to get a clear shot at anything. So you don't treat this as serious in the sense of intention. Treat it as serious as part of the lawful process specific to the oligarchical system. And look at what happened. Look what happened in Egypt, with the succession of revolutions in Egypt recently. Same kind of thing. What's going on? Take Africa. Africa is the best example of this. Africa is one big maelstrom of genocide, and the genocide is orchestrated by Saudis, orchestrated by the British, so forth. Like take the slaughter in India under British rule. The mass slaughter in India under British rule. This is the oligarchical system. It's the Dutch system. It's the so-called British system. And therefore, that's the way to look at it. Instead of speculating of how we're going to spin the interpretation of the words, why don't we just eliminate the oligarchical system? And then these problems will be clarified.
Let me ask a question on the trilateral negotiations that are now ongoing between Russia, China, and India. Earlier this week, you stated that the rapid pace of negotiations that are occurring between Russia, China, and India indicate a sense of urgency among these three nations to step up their collaboration at the time when Obama and the bankrupt nations of Europe continue to push the world security situation right to the edge of disaster. You warned that unless the situation in the transatlantic is brought under control rapidly through the removal of Obama and the restoration of Glass-Steagall, this array of alliances that are now forming and counter-alliances continues to threaten a very fragile world with the outbreak of war, which still looms despite the diplomatic breakthroughs that have been made in recent months. I would like it if you could address that picture as you saw it earlier this week, and then maybe I can follow it up with some more.
Well, the answer to the question is rather, for me, simple. But it will not be for other people, I'm afraid. I'll get this thing straightened out. No, I'm just wondering how to best put the answer to this question. I would say I would go back to what I said before, and would emphasize in particular the fact that we've got to that we have to have a destiny. We cannot be the honest observers from the sidelines and saying, what do we wish to choose for these guys out there? What are we offering them as the game they can win, or the game they will like? And that's not the answer. The answer is that what we have to do. Now, I'm doing this all the time, as you know. I'm always looking at how we can, within principle, how we can deal with these conflicting kinds of things in order to get a result which is based on what Nicholas of Cusa's intention was. That's simple. That we want a system not like the European systems, not like the European heritage of systems, but exactly what Cusa was aiming for, to go across the great waters of the oceans into lands beyond, where the oligarchical system as they had known it could either be eliminated there or would be prevented from developing there. That's still our problem. And we have to play the game with an idea on exactly what is our intention, what really is our moral intention for mankind. Knowing what the problems of mankind are, which I happen to be good at. So therefore I'm constantly thinking of how we're going to solve these problems. Not in order to make compromises. I don't believe in compromise. We have too many compromised people around anyway. But the point is we have to think about how we're going to engineer the process of getting to what is an escape from the relics of the oligarchical system. Now you've got China, look, India, tremendous burdens of oligarchical traditions. Islam, full of tremendous oligarchical problems. So what we have to do is define what must happen and how can we get it to happen. And therefore we also want to open people's eyes and minds to understanding what society is supposed to be, what the intention of mankind is. And mankind does have an intention. If you look at the history of mankind as a species and think in terms of energy flux density and how the human species has moved as the animal species never did. Only the voluntary capabilities of the human species have been capable of rising to ever higher levels of energy flux density. And we are on the road next, now, to get to thermonuclear fusion. And there are things that lie beyond that. So we are thinking really about the future of mankind, not as a fixed form of existence, but as an improvement, a self-improvement. Like I'm dealing with the question where some people talk about Mars. I say, well, don't stop talking about getting on Mars, putting people on Mars. Cut it out. If you try to start putting people on Mars now, you get a catastrophe. But as this Curiosity demonstrated, mankind from Earth, especially if aided by thermonuclear fusion, can actually move the solar system, change it, change its character. And we can put machines on, like Curiosity, which is only an example of this. We can put those things on Mars. We can use those things we put on Mars to engineer changes on Mars that we want to make. We know we should make, even without man ever touching Mars soil itself. We want a quasi-automated system within the solar system, within those parts of the solar system which have cases like Mars on the one hand, or cases like different kinds of objects in space that are menacing. And we want to control this system for security against dangerous objects in this vicinity where we live. We have to think about other things, longer range threats, which we must find out how to deal with these things. And mankind sitting on Earth with a real engineering program, scientific engineering program of this type, can actually make all the steps we need right away. And hopefully what we will learn in the process of this progress, we will be able to apply to larger outreach. We've got comets we've got to deal with. We've got to find out how to deal with that problem. How we can develop systems which will give us a tip-off of how things are going in this matter. And tip-off as to what we might be able to do to thwart an effect we're trying to prevent. So these are the kinds of things to consider. Mankind has a principle, a deathless principle in a sense, of developing mankind itself through its ability of creativity. And only mankind, as far as we know, has creativity. Only the human species. And therefore the human species has a destiny, at least within this solar system. And we don't even know too much about that yet. And we have to think in terms of training our people to become the masters of this kind of progress toward the future. And that's the only way you can really answer the questions that you posed in those terms. What can man do? What must man do? We must take over the nearby parts of the solar system. We must control the objects floating out there and threatening us. We have to deal with what can we do to create a management system, including the case of Mars or the Curiosity. What does Curiosity tell us about the future on Mars and the meaning of the future on Mars? A simple little thing, and it's almost a toy. But that toy demonstrates what the human mind can cause to happen on Mars, and what the effect can be of doing that on Mars on the rest back here on Earth. These are the kinds of ideas we should think about. Not victory of beating people up, or that sort of thing. But this, true creativity, the ability of the human mind to do what, as far as we know, no other phenomenon of the solar system does. Or at least we don't know any of it. And therefore we have to understand, therefore we are here. We are responsible. What are we going to do about it? And once you get our people with that idea in an educational system which is based on that orientation, you've got it. The best shot you have.
Thank you. Let me just elaborate a little bit on the shape of these trilateral negotiations, because I think it's worthwhile to have this in one place for people, and then I'll give you a chance to answer one final question. But what's happened over the past 7 days with Russia, China, and India is that you've had an accelerated pace of these trilateral negotiations, starting with Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's visit to Moscow, where they discussed greater economic and military cooperation between Russia and India. Nuclear power was at the center stage of those negotiations. Russia is committing to build 2 more 1,000 megawatt nuclear reactors in India on top of the 2 that are currently being completed. Immediately following that visit to Moscow, Prime Minister Singh flew directly to Beijing, where he met with both President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang on the same day. And they agreed on expanded China-India partnership, including in matters concerning defense. And this visit came directly in the wake of Russian President Medvedev's official state visit to China, where, among other things, I think this is crucial, he toured the Chinese Institute for Plasma Physics, which houses the superconducting East Tokamak facility, which is one of the most advanced fusion research facilities in the world. And Medvedev was accompanied by academician Velikov, who was the originator of the concept of an international magnetic fusion experiment, which now has taken the form of the ITER project of today. Also, part of the delegation was Grigory Trubnikov, who's the deputy director of the Dubna Institute for Nuclear Research, which houses the Nucleotron-based Collider facility, another one of these international atomic research projects. And according to Russian government reports, one area for Russian-Chinese collaboration that was agreed to coming out of this trip was the development of new superconducting materials to be used at the East Fusion Reactor research facility. Additionally, there's cooperation on aeronautics, nuclear energy, agriculture, infrastructure. And then on top of that, you had this past weekend the Russian State Energy Corporation and the China National Petroleum Corporation signing a landmark deal to create a joint venture to develop oil and gas reserves in Siberia. This is in combination with the completion of, or the agreements around the southern route of the Silk Road, the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar economic corridor. So it's really incredible. It's clear that the Eurasian land bridge idea is moving along quite nicely. What the chief analyst for the China Export-Import Bank, Xiao Changhui, had to say is that the Silk Road has the potential of creating a new economic map in the heartland of Eurasia. He said this Silk Road development will eventually be reaching to the shores of the Black Sea and to southern and eastern Europe. And that echoed exactly what the president of South Korea, Park, had to say. She said, "To make Eurasia one continent again, we are required to build a new logistical network. We need to connect the northeastern part of Eurasia with railroads and roads for a multi-purpose logistics network which will eventually be extended to Europe. The Silk Road Express will run from Busan all the way to Europe via North Korea, Russia, China, and Central Asia." Now, my question really originates from the fact that you have personally been involved for, in this case, over 20 years, really going back to your role in Calcutta at the conclusion of World War II, looking out on your own, seeking the independence movements among the people there, seeking independence from the British Empire. You have personally been involved for almost the majority in of your life in setting up the possibility for this incredibly revolutionary shift in the global paradigm to take place. I know that this is something that you're working on in your newest paper, the New Strategy for a Trans-Pacific Option. But in light of all of this, in light of the rapid developments around this trilateral alliance, what's your vision for America's vision, in America's role in the Trans-Pacific world, and really, how can we affirm Nicholas of Cusa's vision for the people of today?
Well, I have one standard because it's a highly personal one. It was my rage developing over time with the school system. And people don't know what's really wrong with the school systems. And because the sense of wrongness requires a sense of a comparison of what might be the right answer as opposed to what the wrong answer is. Now, most people in the school systems, they don't know the difference. That's the problem. And only exceptional people, individually mavericks, real mavericks, who do not accept the standard educational programs. They don't accept them, as I didn't. And I was always in trouble, but I always did just well when it comes to finding the answers. So that's really what the issue lies. It's the ability to see what is really happening. You have to see the future and to see the errors that people are doing. Because you think of it, most people in schools, and it's worse today than it was in my time, shall we say. Now the educational system is rotten, evilly rotten. They're getting the best teachers, which still remain around, and they're getting rid of them as quickly as possible. They're introducing programs which are not fit for animal use, even, if the animals could use them. And so my concern has always been the fact that when you try to get a predetermined right answer imposed upon students in the educational process, you destroy their creativity. Because they're looking at the teacher, or looking at the classroom, or the textbook. They're looking for some answer there, rather than looking for it inside their own mind. And that's been the great criminality which has been increased with the educational system as the educational system became more efficient. For example, in the immediate post-war period, I'm back from military service, I'm back in the United States, and the crap is worse then than it was before. The education that they were shoving down our throats then in the post-war period was vastly inferior to what we'd had shoved down on our throats in the pre-war period. And so this incompetence, the lack of understanding of what the meaning of dedication is to success, to progress, to discovery. And you think about all the history of mankind. Who becomes mankind in the time in South Africa, for example, where mankind uses fire, perhaps for the first time there. And then when mankind understands fire as such, it then goes to higher forms which are equivalent to fire, chemical forms, chemical actions, or certain kinds of training, biological developments. And that's what reality is. When you try to go a predetermined, fixed program of obedience training to do as you are told and taught, you lose the ability to see the future. And that's what the real issue is. Because human beings, if they're conditioned to meet the challenge of answering the question from inside themselves, and will take hints and so forth, but will realize that they have to make the decision. Whereas in the typical school, you're told you have to learn the answer which is predetermined to be given to you. The result is that we have people who are well educated, but they can't think.
Thank you very much. On that note, I wish to conclude tonight's webcast. I would remind people before we close that LaRouche PAC needs your donations. You can contribute to LaRouche PAC on our website, which is displayed on the screen, or by calling into our national center, which is also displayed on tonight's broadcast, the 800 number. So I thank you very much for joining us tonight. I thank Lynn for addressing us, and thank you very much, Dennis, for joining me in the studio to pose the questions. Thank you for tuning in. That brings a conclusion to our webcast tonight, and thank you.